The morning alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chambers like it had for the past 300 years, but today something felt different to Secretary Ixhan as she reviewed the attendance records. Ambassador Kyle Martinez from Earth had missed his third meeting in a row, and that never happened with humans, because they were always on time and always prepared with detailed reports that other species often found boring, but somehow always proved useful later when problems arose that nobody else had thought about. Veltar, the tall, blue-skinned Zephyrian delegate, waved one of his 4 arms dismissively when Ixahan mentioned the human absence and said humans were probably just having one of their strange political changes. That they called elections, where they actually let ordinary citizens choose their leaders, which seemed chaotic to most council species who inherited their positions through family lines or combat trials or mental competitions depending on their culture. The council meeting proceeded as usual, with the Draconians arguing about trade routes and the Crystalline Collective requesting more time to consider proposals they had been thinking about for decades, while the quick-thinking Nexari grew, impatient with everyone, and made sarcastic comments that translated poorly through the universal language systems. But Ixhan kept thinking about the humans and their empty seats. During the lunch break, she accessed the communication logs and discovered something that made her stomach twist with worry, because the regular data streams from human space had stopped completely 3 days ago, and the massive cargo convoys that delivered raw materials and manufactured goods to half the galaxy had simply vanished from all tracking systems without sending any distress signals or filing route changes. Meanwhile, in the Kepler sector, Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks stood on the bridge of the research vessel New Horizon, watching her mixed crew of humans, aliens, and artificial intelligences work together on a project to map quantum fluctuations in space when her personal communicator buzzed with an encrypted message that made her face go pale as she read the simple words, "Immediate recall. All personnel. No exceptions, effective immediately." She looked around at her colleagues who had become friends over the past 2 years, including Zixil, the insectoid engineer who had taught her 17 different ways to repair fusion cores, and Dr. Kethara, the plant-based biologist who always brought exotic fruits from her homeworld to share during their long research missions, and Lisa realized she would probably never see any of them again, but the orders were clear, and humans always followed orders when they came from Earth Command. Dr. Ryan Clark had spent 15 years building his laboratory on the jungle world of Kepler 442b, where he studied how different alien species could share genetic material to create new medicines that could save lives across the galaxy, and his breakthrough research on cross-species compatibility had been scheduled for presentation to the full council next month, but now he was packing everything into sealed containers, while his alien research partners watched in confusion. His assistant Morgan, a friendly amphibian creature with large, curious eyes, kept asking why he was leaving so suddenly, and Ryan could only say that he had received new orders from his government, while carefully avoiding any mention of the real reason, which was that Earth had decided to cut all ties with the Galactic Council permanently, and every human in Council space was being recalled home immediately. The packing took 3 days because Ryan had accumulated years of research data and personal belongings, but he made sure to delete all his computer files and take every sample and piece of equipment that belonged to Earth, while leaving behind only the basic laboratory structure that the aliens had helped build. And when Morgan asked if he would ever return, Ryan looked into those big hopeful eyes and said he did not know. Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds as human scientists, diplomats, traders, and colonists received the same message and began their quiet exodus from every council facility, research station, and diplomatic post in known space, while their alien colleagues, friends, and sometimes romantic partners watched in growing bewilderment as an entire species seemed to simply vanish from galactic civilization. The human colony on Arcturus Prime had been a neutral meeting ground for three hostile alien species who had been fighting over mining rights for decades, but somehow managed to work together when humans mediated their disputes, and now the colony was empty except for abandoned buildings and carefully dismantled equipment that the humans had taken with them. When they left, security cameras showed the evacuation had been orderly and efficient, with humans working in teams to pack everything valuable while destroying or removing all their technology and databases so thoroughly that not even fragments remained for other species to study and understand. And when the alien investigators arrived, they found only empty shells of what had once been thriving communities. The most unsettling discovery was that humans had not just left, but had erased almost every trace of their presence, as if they wanted to make sure that nothing they had built or created could be used by the council species who remained behind, and this suggested a level of planning and coordination that indicated the withdrawal had been prepared long before anyone realized it was happening. As reports flooded in from across the galaxy, it became clear that humanity had not just left the council, but had somehow managed to evacuate millions of people from hundreds of worlds in perfect coordination, while maintaining complete secrecy about their intentions and destinations. And now the vast network of human civilization that had quietly supported galactic trade science and diplomacy for generations had simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and growing worry about what would happen next. 3 months after the humans disappeared, the first cracks appeared in the smooth operation of galactic civilization when merchant ships began arriving at their destinations days or sometimes weeks behind schedule, because the complex routing systems that humans had developed over decades suddenly made no sense to the alien captains who tried to follow the same paths. The Centauri shipping lanes had been the busiest trade route in the galaxy, with massive cargo vessels moving raw materials and finished goods between hundreds of worlds in a carefully coordinated dance that kept entire economies running smoothly. But now ships sat in long queues at jump points while confused traffic controllers tried to figure out how humans had managed to move so much cargo so efficiently. Captain Vex Tar of the Draconian freighter Iron Claw found himself stuck in orbit around Rigel Station for 6 days, waiting for clearance to dock, because the automated systems that used to handle scheduling had stopped working properly, and the alien staff could not figure out how to repair them, since all the technical manuals had been written by humans and contained references to concepts that other species did not understand. The economic impact spread quickly as factories on industrial worlds ran out of raw materials while agricultural planets watched their crops rot in storage facilities because the transportation network had become unreliable and unpredictable, and businesses that had operated on tight schedules for generations suddenly found themselves unable to meet their commitments to customers. Council Admiral Zethkol received increasingly desperate reports from frontier sectors where human colonies had served as neutral meeting grounds for species that normally could not tolerate each other. But now those carefully maintained safe zones had gone completely silent, with all human residents simply vanishing overnight. The investigation teams that visited these abandoned colonies found something deeply disturbing because the humans had not just packed up and left, but had systematically dismantled every piece of technology and infrastructure they had built, while leaving behind only empty buildings that contained no useful equipment or information about where the inhabitants had gone. Security footage from the colony on Tau Ceti showed humans working in organized teams to disassemble power generators, communication arrays, and manufacturing equipment with the same methodical efficiency they had shown in building those facilities years earlier, and the aliens who watched these recordings felt a chill of fear as they realized how thoroughly the humans had prepared for their departure. Elena Rodriguez had been the head of the Galactic Emergency Response Coordination Center for 8 years, and her alien subordinates had grown accustomed to her calm competence in managing crises that affected multiple species across vast distances, but they only understood the true scope of her role after she left, and disasters began cascading out of control. When a massive solar flare threatened the heavily populated Vega system, the response should have been coordinated through Elena's protocols that would evacuate civilians, redistribute emergency supplies, and deploy rescue ships to minimize casualties. But without her expertise, the various alien agencies worked at cross purposes, and the death toll was 10 times higher than it should have been. The pattern repeated across the galaxy as natural disasters, pirate raids, medical emergencies, and industrial accidents overwhelmed local governments that had never realized how much they depended on human coordination to respond effectively. And the alien officials who tried to take over these responsibilities discovered that the humans had been managing incredibly complex systems that required intuitive understanding of multiple species, psychology, and technology. Dr. Crixon the Nexari, intelligence operative who specialized in gathering information about potential threats to Council security, decided to investigate the edge of human space to determine what the missing species was planning, but what she found there challenged everything the Council thought they knew about human capabilities. The border regions that had once contained small human research stations and mining outposts now showed massive construction projects with entire star systems being rapidly transformed by engineering on a scale that exceeded anything in Council space, and the technology being used appeared to be generations ahead of what humans had shared with other species. Stellar engineering projects that should have taken decades were being completed in months, and new colonies were being established with infrastructure that surpassed the most advanced Council worlds, while defense networks of unknown design protected these expanding territories from any outside interference or observation. Captain Nathan Perry had served as human liaison to the Council Defense Force for 12 years, and his reports about growing human dissatisfaction with Council policies had been filed and forgotten by alien commanders who considered him a competent but unremarkable officer whose concerns about human political issues were not relevant to military operations. Now those same commanders desperately searched through archived communications, trying to understand the warnings that Nathan had tried to give them about the Hereditary Species Classification Acts that ranked alien races by their technology at first contact, and the technology-sharing restrictions that prevented humans from accessing research data from species considered more advanced. The files revealed a pattern of human proposals for reform that had been consistently rejected by the Council majority, who believed their traditional systems had worked well for thousands of years and saw no reason to change just because one young species had different ideas about fairness and equality. Nathan's final report before his recall contained a detailed analysis of growing human resentment about being treated as junior partners in a civilization they had helped build and largely maintained. But the alien leaders who read it now realized they had completely misunderstood the implications of human frustration. The economic data was particularly troubling because it showed that human colonies were not suffering from their separation from Council markets, but were actually thriving with trade networks and industrial production that had grown exponentially since the withdrawal began, and this suggested that humans had been preparing for independence much longer than anyone had suspected. Intelligence reports indicated that human space was expanding in all directions, with new colonies being established at a rate that exceeded the Council's own expansion during its golden age, and the technology being deployed showed innovations that went far beyond anything humans had demonstrated while they were members of galactic civilization. As the reports accumulated on Admiral Zethkol's desk, he began to understand that the Council had not lost a useful but replaceable member species, but had driven away the civilization that had been quietly holding the galaxy together through their expertise in logistics coordination and crisis management. Council Speaker Prime. Thyla stood before the assembled delegates in the Great Chamber where representatives from 47 species had gathered to address the growing crisis caused by humanity's sudden departure, and his confident voice echoed through the vast space as he assured everyone that this was merely a temporary negotiating tactic that would resolve itself once humans realized their economic dependence on Council markets. The Draconian Trade Consortium nodded agreement through their translator devices because they controlled the most valuable mining operations in the galaxy and believed that human greed would force them to return when they discovered how expensive it was to obtain rare metals and exotic materials without access to established trade networks that had taken centuries to develop. Thylus gestured with his elongated arms toward the holographic displays that showed council economic projections, indicating that human colonies would begin suffering shortages within 6 months and would be forced to negotiate their return to galactic civilization from a position of weakness that would allow the Council to impose new restrictions on their activities. The assembled delegates listened approvingly as various speakers explained why humanity needed the Council more than the Council needed humanity, because humans were still a young species with limited technology who had contributed useful services, but could be replaced by other species who were eager to take over their roles in trade and diplomacy. However, the intelligence reports that arrived during the meeting painted a very different picture of human activities since their withdrawal, because long-range sensors had detected massive construction projects in human space that suggested technological capabilities far beyond what they had demonstrated while members of the Council Intelligence Operative Crixon presented her findings to the Security Committee in a closed session that made several delegates extremely uncomfortable because her data showed that humans were not struggling economically, but were instead building new civilizations with infrastructure that surpassed the most advanced Council worlds. The construction projects included stellar engineering on a scale that the Council had never attempted, with entire solar systems being modified to support massive populations, while industrial complexes produced goods and materials using manufacturing techniques that seemed to be decades ahead of current galactic standards. Even more disturbing was evidence that human space was expanding rapidly in all directions, with new colonies being established at a rate that exceeded the growth of Council civilization during its most prosperous periods, and defensive installations that used unknown technology were protecting these territories from outside observation. Crixon's report included analysis of communication intercepts that suggested humans had been preparing for their departure much longer than anyone suspected, and had been secretly developing advanced technology while deliberately limiting what they shared with other Council species. The Security Committee reviewed classified files that showed human contributions to Council technology had always been simplified versions of more sophisticated systems, and that humans had consistently underestimated their own capabilities when providing technical specifications to alien engineers. Captain Nathan Perry's archived reports took on new significance as investigators realized that his warnings about human dissatisfaction had been far more serious than anyone understood, because he had been documenting a systematic pattern of discrimination that treated humans as second-class citizens despite their crucial contributions to galactic civilization. The hereditary species. Classification acts that ranked alien races based on their technology at first contact had placed humans in a middle tier that denied them access to advanced research while requiring them to share their own innovations with species considered more developed. Nathan's reports showed that humans had grown increasingly frustrated with technology sharing restrictions that prevented them from studying certain fields while obligating them to provide detailed specifications of their own discoveries to the Council database that other species could access freely. The files revealed that human representatives had submitted dozens of proposals for reform over the years, including the human proposal for species equality that would have abolished the caste system and created true partnership between all Council members. But these initiatives had been consistently voted down by species who benefited from the existing hierarchy. Cultural anthropologist Dr. Amy Foster's research had been dismissed as irrelevant academic speculation when she warned that humans viewed the Council differently than other species. Because while most aliens saw it as a beneficial hierarchy where advanced races guided primitive ones, humans considered it a temporary alliance between equals who happened to develop different technologies. Her studies showed that the fundamental Philosophical differences between human and alien worldviews made long-term cooperation extremely difficult because humans expected to be treated as partners while the council structure was designed to maintain the dominance of older, established civilizations. Amy's research had predicted that humans would eventually refuse to accept their assigned role in the galactic hierarchy, but her warnings had been ignored by council leaders who believed that human complaints were just growing pains that would fade as they adapted to their proper place in galactic society. The investigation into human activities before their departure revealed a disturbing pattern of preparation that suggested they had been planning their exodus for years. While maintaining the appearance of loyal council membership and continued cooperation with galactic institutions, financial records showed that human trading companies had been gradually shifting their operations away from council markets while building independent networks that connected their colonies directly without relying on alien intermediaries or infrastructure. Technical specialists discovered that humans had been slowly withdrawing their expertise from critical council systems, while training replacements who lacked the intuitive understanding needed to maintain complex networks that kept galactic civilization functioning smoothly. The most troubling revelation was that humans had apparently been restraining their own technological development while members of the council because their rapid advancement since departure indicated capabilities that far exceeded what they had demonstrated during their centuries of membership. As the evidence accumulated, Thylus found himself facing increasingly angry delegates who demanded explanations for why the council had failed to recognize the signs of human dissatisfaction and preparation for independence. The economic projections that had predicted human desperation were proving completely wrong as reports arrived, showing that human colonies were not only surviving, but thriving with trade networks and industrial production that had grown exponentially since their withdrawal from council oversight. The delegates, who had confidently predicted human return, began to realize that they had fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between humanity and the rest of galactic civilization, and that their assumptions about human dependence and limitations had been catastrophically incorrect. 6 months after humanity vanished from council space, the first major crisis struck when a deadly plague began spreading through the Outer Rim territories, and the medical response revealed just how much the galaxy had depended on human expertise that other species had never bothered to understand or appreciate. Dr. Velquan, the crystalline medical coordinator who took charge of the epidemic response, discovered that the standard council protocols were completely inadequate for containing a disease that jumped between species with different biological systems, and the situation deteriorated rapidly as infected ships carried the plague to new worlds faster than medical teams could respond. The emergency medical database contained hundreds of containment procedures developed by Dr. Maya Singh, the human epidemiologist, who had retired to Earth 3 years earlier, but her protocols seemed overly complicated and expensive to alien medical authorities who preferred simpler approaches that had worked well for single-species outbreaks in the past. After 2 months of failed containment efforts and millions of deaths across 12 worlds, the desperate medical teams finally implemented Maya's protocols exactly as written and discovered that her seemingly paranoid precautions were actually the minimum requirements for stopping a multi-species pandemic. The human procedures required extensive genetic testing quarantine facilities that could accommodate different alien physiologies, and communication networks that could track disease vectors across vast distances in real time, but when properly implemented, they stopped the plague's spread within weeks. Dr. Velquan realized with growing horror that Maya had designed her protocols based on intimate understanding of how diseases could mutate when jumping between radically different biological systems, and that her expertise had prevented dozens of potential pandemics during her years of service to the Council. Meanwhile, across The galaxy-aging infrastructure began failing catastrophically as the engineering systems that humans had built and maintained for generations started breaking down without the constant attention of technicians who understood their complex interconnections. The Nexus Gate network that enabled faster-than-light travel between star systems had been humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization, but the quantum mechanics that made it work were poorly understood by other species who had simply used the technology without learning the underlying principles. Chief Engineer Zix Tar of the Vegan Technical Institute attempted to repair a malfunctioning gate using standard council procedures and accidentally created a cascade failure that disabled the entire network for 3 sectors, stranding hundreds of ships in deep space and cutting off communication between major worlds. The rescue operations revealed that human engineers had been using intuitive understanding of quantum field interactions to keep the gate network stable, and that the simplified maintenance manuals they had provided to other species contained only basic procedures that worked when systems were functioning normally. When investigation teams finally gained access to abandoned human research facilities, they discovered technical documentation that shocked even the most advanced council scientists because it showed that humans had been deliberately limiting their technology sharing while secretly developing innovations far beyond what they had revealed. Former Council technical advisor Ben Hamilton's private laboratory on Luna contained prototypes of devices that used principles unknown to galactic science, including faster-than-light communication, systems that did not require the massive infrastructure of the Nexus gates and power generation techniques that could make any world completely energy independent. The research notes revealed that every piece of technology humans had shared with the Council was a simplified version of far more advanced systems, and that human engineers had spent decades creating dumbed-down variants that other species could build and maintain without understanding the actual science involved. Ben's personal journals contained detailed observations about the limitations of alien thinking patterns and his frustration with council policies that prevented humans from sharing their most advanced discoveries while requiring them to provide detailed specifications of less sophisticated technologies. The most shocking discovery was a complete technical database that showed human understanding of physics had advanced far beyond current galactic knowledge and included theoretical frameworks for technologies that could revolutionize space travel, energy production, and materials science. Council scientists who studied these files realized that humans had been intentionally holding back their civilization's development, while members of the galactic community and that their rapid advancement since departure was simply the result of removing artificial constraints they had imposed on themselves. The implications were staggering because it meant that humanity had possessed the capability to solve most of the galaxy's technical problems for years, but had been prevented from doing so by council policies that treated them as junior partners whose contributions needed to be limited and controlled. Chief Science Advisor Morgeth assembled a team of the Council's best researchers to analyze human innovations and estimate how far ahead their technology had actually been. But the investigation revealed knowledge gaps that made accurate assessment impossible. The humans had apparently been conducting research in fields that other species had not even identified as important, and their understanding of fundamental forces showed insights that challenged basic assumptions about how the universe worked. Engineering reports from recently abandoned human facilities showed construction techniques that could build habitable worlds from raw asteroids and manufacturing processes that could produce any desired material from basic atomic components using equipment that was surprisingly compact and efficient. The most disturbing discovery was that humans had been capable of these achievements for decades, while pretending to be satisfied with their limited role in council civilization, and that their technology had continued advancing at an accelerated pace during their years of apparent cooperation and integration. As the full scope of human capabilities became clear, Council leaders faced the terrifying realization that they had not been helping a developing species learn to participate in galactic civilization, but had actually been constraining the most advanced race in known space. The evidence suggested that humans had been quietly solving problems and maintaining systems that other species could not handle, while accepting restrictions on their own development in order to maintain peaceful relationships with alien civilizations that were actually far less capable than anyone had understood. The technological revelations forced the Council to confront the possibility that humanity's departure was not a temporary political dispute, but a permanent separation by a species that had finally decided to stop limiting itself for the benefit of less advanced neighbors who had never appreciated their contributions. The analytical Shivari race volunteered to lead the investigation into humanity's final months in Council space because their species specialized in pattern recognition and data analysis. But even their sophisticated minds struggled to comprehend the systematic way humans had been marginalized by the very civilization they had helped build and maintain. Senior investigator Chevelle assembled thousands of hours of security recordings from council chambers and discovered a disturbing pattern, where human delegates were increasingly isolated during voting sessions, with their proposals consistently rejected by alien species who viewed human perspectives as too radical or destabilizing to traditional galactic order. The recordings showed Ambassador Jake Cooper and his predecessors making careful logical arguments for reforms that would have improved efficiency and fairness throughout council space. But other delegates dismissed these ideas without serious consideration because they challenged hierarchical structures that had existed for millennia. Chevelle's team analyzed voting patterns and discovered that proposals introduced by humans were rejected at rates far higher than similar ideas presented by other species, and that human representatives were gradually excluded from important committees and decision-making bodies despite their obvious competence and expertise. The investigation revealed that many alien delegates had developed subtle but persistent prejudices against human thinking patterns because humans asked uncomfortable questions about why things were done certain ways and suggested changes that threatened the comfortable positions of established powers. Dr. Kethwal, the Nexari sociologist who specialized in interspecies relationships, joined the investigation and uncovered evidence that humans had been systematically denied opportunities for advancement within council institutions, despite their qualifications and contributions. The personnel records showed that human candidates for important positions were consistently passed over in favor of less qualified aliens, and that human expertise was often appropriated by other species who received credit for innovations and solutions that humans had actually developed. Security footage from the final council session attended by human delegates showed Ambassador Jake Cooper delivering a passionate speech about the need for genuine equality between species. But the other delegates appeared bored or dismissive, and several were conducting private conversations during his presentation. The recovered transcript of Jake's final address contained his warning that humanity would not indefinitely accept second-class status in a government they helped build and largely maintained, but the response from other delegates was minimal, with most treating his concerns as minor political theater rather than serious policy issues. Cultural anthropologist Dr. Amy Foster's abandoned research facility on Proxima Station contained decades of detailed observations about the fundamental philosophical differences between human and alien worldviews that explained why peaceful coexistence had ultimately proved impossible. Amy's studies showed that while most council species viewed galactic civilization as a beneficial hierarchy, where advanced races guided primitive ones toward eventual development, humans saw it as a temporary alliance between equals who happened to have developed different technologies at different rates. Her research indicated that humans expected to be treated as partners in galactic government with equal voice in important decisions, while other species assumed that newer members should accept guidance from older civilizations that had already proven their worthiness through technological achievement. The files revealed that Amy had predicted growing conflict between human values and council traditions years before the actual crisis occurred. But her warnings had been dismissed as theoretical speculation with no practical relevance to day-to-day political operations. Dr. Foster's personal journals contained increasingly frustrated observations about how other species failed to understand that humans were fundamentally different from previous council members because they refused to accept permanent subordinate status and expected their civilization to continue advancing. The investigation uncovered the specific incident that had finally convinced humans to abandon their efforts at reform when the council unanimously rejected the human proposal for species equality, which would have abolished the caste system that ranked members based on their technological development. At first, contact. The proposal had been carefully researched and presented with detailed analysis showing how equality would benefit all species by encouraging innovation and cooperation, but every non-human delegate voted against it without offering constructive alternatives or compromise solutions. Ambassador Jake Cooper's private communications during the final weeks revealed his growing conviction that the Council was fundamentally incapable of evolving beyond its founders' limitations, and that humanity was wasting its potential by continuing to participate in a system designed to maintain alien dominance. The most damaging discovery was evidence that several Council species had been actively conspiring to prevent human advancement, because they feared that genuine equality would threaten their own privileged positions in the galactic hierarchy. Intelligence intercepts showed discussions between Draconian and Zephyrian leaders about the need to keep humans focused on service roles rather than leadership positions, and their concerns that human efficiency and innovation could eventually challenge traditional power structures. The conspiracy included systematic efforts to limit human access to advanced research facilities, and to ensure that credit for important discoveries was shared with alien partners who could claim partial ownership of human innovations. Chevelle's final report documented how these discriminatory practices had created a situation where humanity's most brilliant minds were prevented from reaching their full potential while being expected to contribute their expertise to benefit species who actively worked to constrain their development. The investigation revealed that humans had been aware of this discrimination for years, but had continued trying to work within the system while secretly preparing for the possibility that peaceful reform might prove impossible. The evidence showed that human leaders had spent decades building independent infrastructure and developing advanced technologies while maintaining the appearance of loyal council membership, because they hoped that gradual change might eventually create genuine partnership. However, the unanimous rejection of their final reform proposal had convinced them that the Council would never voluntarily abandon the hierarchical system that gave established species advantages over newer members, regardless of actual capabilities or contributions. As Chevelle presented her findings to the Council leadership, the assembled delegates finally understood that humanity's departure had not been an impulsive political gesture, but the culmination of a long process of growing disillusionment with a system that promised equality, but delivered only conditional acceptance. The investigation made clear that humans had tried every possible avenue for peaceful reform and had been rebuffed at every turn by alien species who preferred maintaining their traditional privileges to creating genuine partnership with the most capable civilization in galactic space. 1 year after humanity vanished from Council space, the full scope of the catastrophe became undeniable as trade networks collapsed, technological systems failed, diplomatic crises spiraled out of control, and the species that had once dismissed humans as adequate but replaceable contributors now faced the reality that galactic civilization was slowly disintegrating without them. The economic data painted a devastating picture because industrial production had dropped by 60%. Across Council worlds, as factories struggled to obtain raw materials that human logistics networks had delivered with clockwork precision for generations, while agricultural planets watched their crops rot because the transportation systems were no longer reliable, Council Speaker Prime Thylus found himself presiding over increasingly desperate emergency sessions where delegates argued about solutions to problems that were growing faster than they could be addressed, and the comfortable, Certainty that had characterized galactic government for millennia had been replaced by fear and confusion. The draconian trade consortium, which had confidently predicted human economic collapse, was now facing bankruptcy as their mining operations became unprofitable without the efficient transportation and processing networks that humans had developed and maintained throughout their territory. Meanwhile, long-range sensors continued to detect evidence of massive construction projects in human space, with entire star systems being rapidly industrialized using technology that seemed to advance beyond Council understanding with each passing month. Intelligence reports showed that humanity had colonized more worlds in the past year than the Council had explored in the previous century, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing as they spread throughout previously unknown regions of the galaxy with apparent ease. The most troubling discovery was that human technology had advanced so far beyond Council capabilities that direct comparison was no longer possible because they were using engineering principles and energy sources that alien scientists could not even begin to understand. Dr. Morgeth's research team had spent months analyzing the technical data recovered from abandoned human facilities, but their conclusions were deeply disturbing because they suggested that humanity had been deliberately restraining their technological development for decades, while pretending to be satisfied with their limited role in galactic society. The evidence indicated that humans possess the knowledge and capability to solve virtually every major problem facing Council civilization, including energy shortages, resource depletion, transportation inefficiencies, and the territorial conflicts that had plagued the galaxy for thousands of years. Chief Engineer Zixtar reported that the Nexus Gate network was deteriorating rapidly without human maintenance, and that several critical systems would probably fail completely within the next few months because no other species understood the quantum mechanics well enough to perform necessary repairs. The medical crisis in the Outer Rim had finally been contained, using human protocols, but the response had taken so long that millions had died unnecessarily, and similar emergencies were occurring throughout Council space as coordination systems broke down without human expertise. Economic Minister Vexdal presented projections showing that galactic civilization would face complete collapse within 5 years unless drastic measures were taken, but none of the proposed solutions seemed adequate to address problems that had grown beyond the capability of remaining Council species to manage. The most painful realization was that humans had not been junior partners learning to participate in galactic civilization, but had actually been the foundation that held everything together while other species took credit for achievements that human expertise had made possible. Ambassador Veltar, who had dismissed human concerns a year earlier, now found himself drafting desperate messages to Earth, requesting negotiations. But every communication attempt was ignored as if humanity had written off the Council completely. The few responses that did arrive were polite but firm rejections that indicated humans were no longer interested in participating in galactic government, regardless of what concessions or reforms the Council might offer. Intelligence operative Crixon managed to approach the edge of human space and reported that their civilization had developed beyond anything in Council records, with cities that floated in space industrial complexes that manufactured materials from pure energy and defense systems that could apparently destroy entire fleets without using recognizable weapons. The scope of human achievement since their departure suggested that they had been constraining themselves enormously, while members of the Council, and that their true potential was only now being revealed as they built a civilization that surpassed galactic standards in every measurable way. Council leaders who had spent their careers believing in the superiority of ancient alien wisdom over human innovation were forced to confront the devastating truth that they had been holding back the most advanced species in known space while treating them as students who needed guidance. The philosophical implications were even more disturbing than the practical consequences, because it meant that the entire foundation of galactic civilization had been based on false assumptions about which species were actually capable of leadership and innovation. Reports continued to arrive, showing human expansion and technological advancement. The Council faced the bitter reality that they had not lost a useful member, but had driven away the species that could have led galactic civilization to unprecedented heights of achievement and prosperity. The final blow came when a single human ship appeared at the edge of Council space after months of complete silence and transmitted a message that would forever change the relationship between humanity and the rest of the galaxy. Captain Grace Turner spoke for all humanity when she offered the Council a simple choice between abandoning their hierarchical system to join humanity as genuine equals in exploring the galaxy's unlimited potential or continuing their slow decline alone while human civilization advanced beyond their ability to comprehend. The message made clear that humanity was no longer asking for reform or seeking accommodation within existing structures, but was offering a completely new relationship based on mutual respect and shared exploration of possibilities that neither species could achieve alone. As Grace Turner's ship disappeared back into the vastness of human space, Council leaders realized that their greatest mistake had been confusing quiet competence with weakness and believing that those who serve must necessarily be less capable than those who rule, when the opposite had actually been true. The humans had left without speaking because they had already said everything that mattered through decades of patient service and attempted reform. But the Council had been too proud and comfortable to listen until it was far too late to prevent the loss of the civilization that had been quietly holding their galaxy together.